He said I was nobody. His words cut through the air sharper than any blade, leaving me standing there in the conference room, with the stale smell of burnt coffee and the chill of the air conditioning at my back. My hands trembled slightly, the papers in them a fragile shield, but I refused to let go. He stood at the head of the long table, his expression as cold and dismissive as the gray suit he wore like armor. "You're nothing," Alex said, his voice calm and unbothered. A shadow in the corner. Just another name on the payroll. Nothing more. The words echoed in the room, bouncing off polished wood and the dull flicker of the overhead lights. My colleagues shifted in their seats, eyes fixed on their notes, desperate to pretend they hadn't heard. No one spoke. No one met my eyes. I swallowed hard, the taste of fear and humiliation sharp on my tongue. I could feel my face flush with heat, my pulse quick and loud in my ears. For a moment, I felt very small, but something inside me refused to be crushed. A spark flickered to life in the quiet places of my heart, small but stubborn. I took a slow breath and forced my shoulders back, even though my heart was hammering in my chest. I wouldn't let him see me cower. As the meeting dragged on, I kept my head down, scribbling notes in the margins of my planner. But I wasn't really listening to his words anymore. My mind was turning over his insult again and again, each repetition sharpening that spark into a steady flame. He thought I was nobody. He thought I was invisible. But he didn't know me. He didn't see the nights I stayed, long after everyone else had left, the hours I spent learning every part of this company, every crack in its foundation, and every untapped opportunity. He didn't see the quiet strength I had been building for years, piece by patient piece. When the meeting finally ended, I gathered my papers and walked out without a word. My hands were still trembling, but my steps were steady. In the hallway, the fluorescent lights hummed softly above me, a low drone that seemed to echo the rhythm of my own resolve. He said I was nobody, but he was wrong. The rest of the day passed in a blur of routine. I answered phones with polite efficiency, organized files with careful precision, and moved through each task with the calm of someone who had nothing left to lose. But underneath that calm, there was a drumbeat of determination, a quiet voice that whispered, "You are not nobody. You never were." That night, I lay awake in the dark, the ceiling above me, a blank canvas for my thoughts. His voice echoed in my mind, but instead of feeling defeated, I let it stoke the fire inside me. I thought about the woman I wanted to be, the woman I had always been, buried beneath years of doubt and the weight of someone else's scorn. I thought about every time I had stayed late to fix his mistakes, every quiet sacrifice I had made to keep this company running. I thought about the strength it took to keep going when no one seemed to notice at all. And I realized something important. I wasn't nobody. I was the backbone of this place, even if he refused to see it. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. I stood in front of the mirror, studying my reflection in the dim light. My eyes were shadowed with exhaustion, my mouth set in a line of quiet resolve. But I saw something there I hadn't seen in a long time, a glimmer of defiance, a promise to myself that I wouldn't stay small any longer. I whispered to my reflection, "You are not nobody." And this time, I believed it. At work, I moved through the day with a calm focus, my mind clear and my steps sure. I watched Alex as he barked orders and threw his weight around his arrogance like a shield he clung to. I saw the cracks in his confidence, the way his smile never reached his eyes. And I knew that his power over me was nothing but an illusion, a story I didn't have to believe anymore. By the end of the week, I had a plan. I stayed late every night long after the office had emptied and the lights of the city glowed outside the windows. I read everything I could find: business strategies, leadership books, financial reports. I took notes in the margins, filling page after page with ideas and insights, each word a small step away from the shadow he tried to keep me in. He said I was nobody, so I decided to become somebody he couldn't ignore. One night, as I was locking up the office, the weight of the keys in my hand felt different. They were a symbol of everything he thought he controlled. But I knew better. I knew that one day those keys would be mine. And as I stepped out into the crisp night air, the city lights bright against the dark, I made a promise to myself I would not let his words define me. I would not let his voice be the one that told my story. I was not nobody. I was the beginning of something he would never see coming. The following Monday arrived with a heavy silence. I woke before the alarm clock, the pale light of dawn creeping across the ceiling as I lay there, feeling the weight of the week pressing down on my chest. My mind was already at the office, already bracing for the next round of scorn and dismissal that Alex seemed to serve up so easily. I dressed carefully, choosing a simple blouse and slacks that made me feel both professional and unassuming. I smoothed down my hair, dabbed on a little lipstick, and forced myself to smile in the mirror. "You're not nobody," I told myself again. But as I stepped into the office, that confidence felt like it had been left behind with the warmth of my bed. The morning started with the usual routine emails, phone calls, and the quiet shuffle of feet across the polished floors. Alex arrived late, as he always did, sweeping in with a practiced swagger that filled the room. He didn't spare me a glance as he barked orders and rattled off demands, his voice filling every corner of the office, with the same cold certainty that he was in control. I kept my head down, moving quickly and efficiently, but no matter how hard I worked, I could feel his gaze, the weight of his unspoken disdain, pressing into my shoulders like a burden I could never quite shake. Around midday, he called for an impromptu meeting in the conference room. The air was already thick with tension as I walked in, the other employees shifting uncomfortably in their seats. I took my usual place at the far end of the table, my notepad open and my pen poised to write. Alex stood at the front of the room, arms crossed over his chest, his expression cool and controlled. "We need to talk about last quarter's numbers," he said, his voice calm but with an edge that made my skin prickle. "Some of you have been underperforming." His eyes swept the room, and then they landed on me. The pause was deliberate, heavy with meaning. "Especially you," he said, his tone sharp. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I tried to keep my expression neutral, but my fingers tightened around my pen. "I'm sorry," I said softly. "Is there something specific I need to address?" He raised an eyebrow, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "It's not about specifics," he said. "It's about presence. You're invisible when you should be indispensable. Do you understand?" The room fell into a hush. My cheeks burned with humiliation, and I could feel the heat rising up my neck. Around me, no one dared to meet my gaze. They kept their eyes on their notes on the table, on anything but me. "I do everything I can," I said quietly. "I stay late, I take on extra work." He cut me off with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Excuses," he said. "If I wanted excuses, I'd ask for them. I want results." My throat tightened, but I refused to let the tears come. Not here, not in front of him. Instead, I nodded once, a small, careful movement that felt like it took every ounce of strength I had. "Understood," I said. He turned away, his attention already moving on, but I could still feel the echo of his words clinging to me like a second skin. When the meeting ended, I gathered my things and slipped out of the room as quickly as I could. In the hallway, I paused, pressing my back to the cool wall and taking a slow, steady breath. My hands were shaking, my heart pounding in my chest. I could still hear his voice, the way he'd said the word invisible, like it was a truth I couldn't escape. But as I stood there, the hallway empty and quiet around me, I felt something else too. A flicker of anger, a spark of defiance. He wanted me to believe I was nothing. But I knew better. I had seen the way the company ran, the way everything fell apart, without the small, steady work I did every day. I had seen the gaps in his leadership, the cracks in his carefully curated facade. He could try to tear me down, but he couldn't erase what I had already built. That night, I stayed late in the office, long after the others had gone home. I moved through the quiet rooms, turning off lights and tidying up the small messes that always got left behind. It was a thankless task, but it was mine. And as I moved through the empty office, I felt a calm settle over me. He could say whatever he wanted. He could try to humiliate me in front of everyone. But he didn't know the truth. He didn't know the strength that came from being underestimated. I walked past his office door and paused, my fingers brushing against the cool metal handle. For a moment, I imagined what it would feel like to sit in his chair, to have the power he wielded so carelessly. And in that quiet moment, I made myself a promise I would find a way to rise. I would find a way to take back my voice, to prove to myself that I was not invisible. I would not let his words define me. I would not let his humiliation become my truth. I turned away from the door and walked back to my desk, the steady beat of my heart echoing the quiet resolve I carried inside. He said I was nobody, but he would see. One day he would see everything I was capable of, and when that day came, I wouldn't need his validation, because I would already know my worth. This was the moment everything began to change. This was the moment I chose myself. The morning after that humiliating meeting, I woke up with a strange kind of calm in my chest. I knew the days ahead wouldn't be easy, but I also knew that something had shifted inside me. The anger and the pain had settled into a quiet resolve. I wouldn't let Alex's words be the final chapter in my story. I wouldn't let him decide who I was. I spent the next few days moving through the office with a deliberate steadiness. I kept my head down and my hands busy, but inside my mind was working overtime. I watched Alex as he strutted through the halls, his voice ringing out like a hammer every time he spoke. I watched the way the other employees flinched when he barked orders, the way they scrambled to please him, even as they resented every demand. I saw it all, and I filed it away. Late at night, after the last light in the office had gone out, and the building had settled into a hush, I stayed behind. I pulled out the folders he never bothered to read, the reports he dismissed as unimportant. I read every line, every figure, every carefully worded memo that spoke of the cracks beneath the surface of his empire. I was tired, bone-deep tired, but there was a strange energy that kept me going, a quiet thrill at the thought that knowledge was power. And I was gathering it piece by piece. At home, I turned my nights into small battles of self-improvement. I enrolled in an online leadership course, my laptop glowing in the dark, as I listened to lectures on strategy and negotiation. I scribbled notes in the margins of a cheap notebook, filling page after page with ideas and questions. I read articles on finance and management until my eyes blurred and my mind buzzed with the possibilities. Each night felt like I was stacking bricks, building something solid and real in the quiet shadows of my life. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing, not even Mark. It wasn't that I didn't trust him. It was that this felt like something I had to do alone. A promise to myself that I could stand on my own, no matter what anyone else thought. At work, I started to notice the little things I'd overlooked before. The way Alex's voice always rose when he felt challenged. The way he cut people off mid-sentence, as if their words were nothing but air. The way he bragged about deals he'd barely had a hand in, taking credit for work he didn't understand. It was all there, plain as day. And with each observation, I felt my confidence grow a little stronger. One afternoon, I found myself alone in the break room, my coffee growing cold in my hands. I stared out the window at the city skyline, the glass towers gleaming in the late afternoon sun. I thought about the years I'd spent feeling like a footnote in someone else's story, about the quiet shame that had kept me small and silent. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I was done shrinking myself to fit into someone else's narrative. That night, I stayed late again, the office bathed in the soft glow of the emergency exit signs. I pulled up a chair at the conference table, spreading out reports and financial statements like puzzle pieces. There was a rhythm to it, a calm focus that steadied my breathing and quieted the doubts that still tried to creep in. I found patterns in the numbers that told a story Alex didn't seem to see, a story of missed opportunities, of half-finished deals, and careless mistakes. I took notes, my pen moving quickly across the page. The more I wrote, the more I felt the shape of something new taking form in my mind, a vision of what this company could be if it wasn't buried under his arrogance. And I realized that maybe I didn't just want to survive here. Maybe I wanted to lead. Maybe I wanted to take everything I'd learned in the shadows and bring it into the light. I closed my notebook and sat back in my chair, my heart steady in my chest. Alex had said I was nobody, but he didn't know how hard I was willing to work, how far I was willing to go to prove him wrong. The next morning, I walked into the office with my head held high. I greeted my coworkers with a small smile, my shoulders squared, and my steps confident. I didn't need anyone else to see the changes inside me. I just needed to keep moving forward, one small act of courage at a time. As the days turned into weeks, I kept up my quiet strategy. I learned everything I could, soaking up knowledge like sunlight. I took on small challenges that I'd once shied away from, testing my voice in conversations I would have stayed silent in before. And each time I spoke, I felt that voice grow a little stronger. There were moments when the old fear crept in, when I caught myself doubting whether I was really strong enough to do this. But then I remembered the weight of his words. "You're nothing!" And I let them fuel me instead of break me. I let them remind me that I had nothing to lose and everything to gain. One Friday night, as I locked up the office, I paused in the doorway and looked back at the empty room. The city lights glowed outside the windows, soft and steady in the darkness. I took a slow breath, feeling the quiet promise of the work I'd done settle around me. This was just the beginning, the first small steps in a plan that would change everything. I was done being the invisible one. I was done letting his voice be louder than my own. And as I stepped out into the cool night air, I knew that whatever came next, I was ready for it. He said I was nobody, but he was about to learn just how wrong he really was. The days grew longer as winter slowly loosened its grip, and I could feel the shift in the air. There was a new energy humming beneath the surface of everything I did, a quiet determination that kept me steady, even when doubt tried to creep in. Each morning, I woke before the sun, standing in the bathroom mirror, and reminding myself, "You are not nobody. You are someone." At work, Alex still wore his confidence like armor, his words as sharp as ever. But I saw past the swagger now. I saw the cracks that ran beneath his polished surface, the way his eyes flickered whenever he was challenged, the subtle tightness in his shoulders when someone asked a question he didn't have the answer to. He was so certain he had everyone fooled, but he had never really seen me. And that was about to change. It started small. I took on a new project, a quarterly report that Alex had always handed off to someone else with a careless wave of his hand. He assumed I would do what I always had, handle the details, stay quiet, fade into the background. But I didn't. I pored over the numbers late at night, tracing the stories they told. I found missed opportunities, expenses that didn't add up, and questions that demanded answers. I pulled them all together in a report that was clear, precise, and impossible to ignore. The next morning, I placed it on his desk before he even arrived, the weight of it solid and real beneath my fingertips. When he walked in, he glanced at the folder, his brow furrowing as he flipped through the pages. "What's this?" he asked, his tone dismissive. "A report," I said, my voice calm, "on last quarter's performance. I noticed some gaps that need to be addressed." He looked up at me, his eyes narrowing. For a moment, I saw something flicker there, surprise maybe, or the first glimmer of unease. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by his usual smirk. "You're getting bold?" he said softly, almost like it was a compliment. But I knew better. He didn't like bold. Bold was dangerous. Bold was a threat. I nodded once, a small smile playing at the corners of my mouth. "I'm just doing my job," I said. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity, but underneath it all, I could feel the shift. He didn't look at me the same way he used to. The contempt was still there, but it was tempered now by something else, something that tasted a lot like respect, even if he would never admit it. That night, I stayed late again, the office quiet around me, as I worked by the glow of the desk lamp. I was going through old expense reports when I noticed something odd, small discrepancies that didn't quite make sense. Little red flags hidden in the numbers. I leaned closer, tracing the figures with my fingertip, my mind whirring. It wasn't just sloppy bookkeeping, it was deliberate. My pulse quickened as I flipped through the records, each page confirming what I already suspected. Alex wasn't just arrogant, he was careless, and he was hiding something. I sat back in my chair, my breath coming in short, shallow bursts. The weight of what I'd found settled over me like a cloak. This was bigger than I'd realized, bigger than I'd planned for, But even as fear twisted in my stomach, I felt that spark again, small and steady, refusing to be snuffed out. I gathered the files and placed them in a neat stack on my desk, my hands steady. I didn't know what I would do with them yet, but I knew I couldn't look away. Not now. Not when the truth was right there in front of me. The next morning, I came into the office early, my mind still buzzing with questions. I walked past Alex's office door and paused, my fingertips brushing against the cool wood. For a moment, I thought about slipping the files inside, about laying it all out in front of him, daring him to deny it. But I didn't. Not yet. This was a game of patience, a game of timing, and I would play it on my terms. Instead, I locked the files away in the bottom drawer of my desk, the key cold and solid in my hand. It felt like a promise, like a first move in a game that was just beginning. The rest of the day passed in a haze of quiet calculation. I watched Alex closely, noting the way he deflected questions and shifted blame onto others whenever something went wrong. I saw the small flashes of uncertainty in his eyes, the way he covered them with quick smiles and easy laughter. And I knew that he was slipping, one small misstep at a time. That night, as I walked home beneath the streetlights, I felt a strange kind of exhilaration. I was playing a dangerous game, but for the first time, it felt like I had the upper hand. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was choosing, I was moving, and I was ready for whatever came next. Back at home, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, the steam curling around my fingers. I thought about the files locked in my desk, the quiet power they represented. I thought about the woman I was becoming, the woman who refused to be invisible, who refused to be defined by someone else's arrogance. I whispered to myself, "You're not nobody." And I believed it with every beat of my heart. This was my first move, and I knew it wouldn't be my last, because he might have said I was nothing, but he was about to learn that I was so much more. The morning felt heavier than usual, the sky outside dull and gray as I walked into the office. I could feel the weight of the files locked in my desk drawer, the silent promise they held. Each step I took felt deliberate, each breath measured and calm. I knew today was the day I would confront Alex. My heart beat steady in my chest, but my mind was sharp, every thought focused on what needed to be done. When I stepped into the office, I saw him standing by the window, his posture relaxed as he spoke on the phone. His laugh was low and easy, the same practiced charm he used on clients and board members. But I saw the way his fingers drummed against the glass, restless and impatient. He hung up and turned, his smile fading slightly when he saw me. Early as always, he said, his tone dismissive. Trying to earn a gold star today, I didn't answer. Instead, I walked to my desk and pulled open the bottom drawer, my fingers closing around the stack of files I had prepared. The weight of them felt solid in my hands, like the truth I was about to put in front of him. I took a deep breath and crossed the room, laying the files on his desk with a quiet finality. "What's this?" he asked, his voice casual, but his eyes sharp. "The numbers," I said. "The ones you've been hiding." For a moment there was silence. Then he laughed, a short, humorless sound. "Hiding, really?" he said, flipping through the pages with a practiced indifference. But I saw the flicker in his eyes, the brief, startled flash that told me he understood exactly what I was holding in my hands. "You've been skimming money," I said, my voice calm and measured. "Adjusting numbers, shifting funds, covering your tracks. I have the proof." He set the file down slowly, his fingers drumming lightly against the cover. "And what exactly do you think you're going to do with this?" he asked, his tone soft and dangerous. I stood my ground. "I'm going to show it to the board," I said. "I'm going to show them the truth." His expression hardened, the mask of charm slipping away to reveal the cold calculation beneath. "You think they'll believe you over me?" he asked, his voice low. "You're nobody, an assistant, a shadow." I felt the words like a slap, but I didn't let them touch the resolve I carried inside. "Maybe I was," I said quietly, "but not anymore." He stepped closer, his presence imposing the heat of his anger radiating off him. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice almost gentle. You're going to regret this. My hands shook slightly, but I kept them at my sides. The only mistake I ever made was letting you convince me I didn't matter, I said. But I see you now. I see what you've done. And I'm not going to let you get away with it. For a moment, the room felt impossibly still. Then he smiled a small cold curve of his lips. You think you're so clever, he said softly. But you have no idea what you're playing with. I took a breath, steadying myself. I know exactly what I'm playing with, I said. And I'm ready for whatever comes next. He laughed again, but there was no humor in it. You're going to ruin everything he said, everything we've built. I shook my head. You built this on lies, I said. It's already broken. He stared at me for a long moment, his jaw tight. Then he reached for the file, his fingers closing around it with a controlled deliberation. You think you can stop me, he said. But you're just one woman, one voice. I lifted my chin, my heart steady in my chest. One voice can be enough, I said, especially when it's telling the truth. He didn't say anything, just turned away and walked to the window, his back to me. I stood there, the silence stretching between us like a taut wire. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and almost thoughtful. You always were too stubborn for your own good, he said. Maybe I said, but I'd rather be stubborn than silent. He turned back to me, his expression unreadable. For a moment, I saw something almost like respect in his eyes, but it was gone before I could be sure. You're playing a dangerous game, he said softly. You're going to lose. Maybe, I said, but not today. He didn't answer. Instead, he picked up the file and flipped through it again. His eyes narrowed. I watched him, my hands steady, my heart calm. I wasn't afraid of him anymore. I saw him for what he was, a man who had built his power on the silence of others. And I was done being silent. I'm going to the board this afternoon, I said. You can either come clean yourself or let them hear it from me. It's your choice. He didn't move, didn't look up. Get out, he said, finally, his voice flat. I turned and walked back to my desk, my steps steady, even though my heart was pounding. I knew this wasn't over. I knew the real fight was just beginning. But for the first time, I felt like I had the strength to see it through. I sat down, the hum of the office around me, and let out a slow breath. He said I would regret this, but I was done living in the shadow of his threats. I was done letting him decide who I was. And as I sat there, my hands calm on the desk, I whispered to myself, this is just the beginning, because he might have been the one to start this war, but I was going to be the one to finish it. The hours after that confrontation felt like they moved both too fast and not fast enough. My hands shook as I sat at my desk, the hum of the office around me, an odd comfort. I tried to focus on the small tasks in front of me, emails, phone calls, the steady rhythm of keys tapping on my keyboard, but my mind kept drifting back to the quiet threat in Alex's voice, the way he had looked at me like I was a problem he couldn't quite solve. By noon, I had made up my mind. I gathered the files again, slipping them into my bag with a sense of finality. I could feel the weight of them against my side as I moved through the office, each step a small act of defiance. I knew what I had to do, and I was ready. The board meeting was set for 3 in the afternoon, but I went early, wanting to be there before Alex could twist the narrative. I walked into the conference room, my heart steady, my hands calm. The board members were already gathering, men and women in suits, their voices low and serious. They looked up when I entered, surprise flickering in their eyes. I had always been the quiet one, the one who fetched coffee and took notes without complaint. Today, I was something else. Today, I was the woman who held the truth in her hands. Good afternoon, I said, my voice clear. I need a few minutes of your time before the meeting begins. There was a pause, a moment of uncertainty that hung in the air like a held breath. Then one of the board members, an older man with kind eyes and a sharp mind, nodded. Of course, he said. What is it? I laid the files out on the table, my fingers steady as I spread them open for everyone to see. I've been going over the company's financials, I said, and I've found discrepancies, things that can't be explained away as simple mistakes. They leaned in, their curiosity piqued, their expressions turning serious. I spoke calmly, laying out the facts one by one. The missing funds, the suspicious transactions, the patterns that all pointed to one man, Alex. As I spoke, I saw the realization dawn in their eyes, the slow dawning understanding that everything they thought they knew was about to be upended. These are serious allegations, one of them said carefully. Do you have proof? I met his gaze, my voice steady. I do. Everything you need is here. There was a moment of silence, a quiet that felt heavy and important. Then the man nodded again. Thank you, he said. We'll review this immediately. I stepped back, my hands at my sides, my breath coming a little easier. I knew I had done what I needed to do. Whatever happened next was out of my hands. As the board members filed in, Alex arrived, his expression calm and unreadable. He didn't look at me as he took his seat at the head of the table, but I saw the slight tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened when he thought no one was watching. The meeting began like any other formal greetings, polite small talk, but there was an undercurrent of unease in the room, a tension that hadn't been there before. And I knew that I had put it there. When the chairman finally spoke, his voice was quiet but firm. Alex, we've been presented with some troubling information, he said. Alex looked up, his smile practiced. Oh, he said lightly. And what information would that be? The chairman gestured to the files on the table. These, he said simply, discrepancies in the company's finances, funds that have gone missing, transactions that don't add up. Alex's smile didn't waver, but I saw the flicker in his eyes, a moment of uncertainty he couldn't quite hide. I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation, he said. I'd be happy to go over the numbers myself. But the board members didn't look convinced. One by one, they turned to me, their expressions serious. You've always been thorough, one of them said. What you're saying? It's not something we can ignore. Alex leaned back in his chair, his hands steepled in front of him. You're all going to take her word over mine? He asked, his voice soft and dangerous. I didn't flinch. It's not about taking sides, I said. It's about the truth. And the truth is in those numbers. For a moment, the room was silent. Then the chairman spoke again. We'll investigate this fully, he said. If there's any truth to these claims, we'll act accordingly. Alex didn't say anything. He just sat there, his eyes fixed on the table in front of him, his jaw tight. I could feel the shift in the room, the way the power he had once wielded so carelessly was slipping through his fingers. When the meeting ended, I stood and gathered my things. Alex didn't look at me as I walked past him, but I didn't need him to. I could feel the weight of my own resolve, the quiet certainty that I had done what I needed to do. Back at my desk, I let out a slow breath, my hands steady as I organized my notes. I knew this wasn't over. I knew Alex wouldn't let go of his power easily, but I also knew that the first crack had been made, and I was ready to widen it. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about everything that had happened, the confrontation, the meeting, the way I had found my voice and used it. I felt a quiet pride settle in my chest, warm and steady. I wasn't nobody. I never had been. And as I drifted off to sleep, I knew one thing for certain: the power had begun to shift, and I was ready to claim it. The next few days were a blur of whispers and sideways glances. The office felt different, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for the next move in a game they didn't fully understand. Alex still walked the halls with his usual arrogance, but there was a tightness to his smile now, a crack in the confidence he wore, like a second skin. I kept my head down, my focus sharp as I moved through my tasks, but inside, I was watching everything, every flicker of unease in his eyes, every pause in his stride. I could feel the balance shifting, and I was ready to see it through. The board called an emergency meeting 3 days after I'd given them the files. I was invited to attend not as an assistant, but as the one who had brought the truth to light. It felt strange stepping into that room and taking a seat at the long table, my heart steady in my chest. For the first time, I wasn't just there to take notes or pour coffee. I was there because I had earned the right to be. The chairman began the meeting with a calm, measured voice. We've reviewed the documents, he said, and we've found Significant issues. His words were careful, but they hung heavy in the air. Alex sat at the other end of the table, his expression unreadable. He didn't look at me, but I could feel his anger like a cold wind. These discrepancies can't be ignored, the chairman continued. We're moving forward with a full audit effective immediately. There was a ripple of agreement around the table, quiet murmurs that spoke of a shift in loyalty. Alex's jaw tightened. I've built this company, he said, his voice low and controlled. You're going to tear it apart on her word alone. I met his gaze evenly, my voice calm when I answered. Not on my word, I said. On the numbers, on the truth. For a moment, the room was silent. Then the chairman spoke again. We've seen enough to know that changes need to be made, he said. Effective immediately. Alex, you're suspended from your role as CEO, pending the outcome of the audit. Alex's face went pale, his mouth opening in protest. You can't be serious, he said, his voice rising. But the chairman didn't waver. We are, he said simply. For the good of the company. I watched as Alex's shoulders slumped the fight, leaving him all at once. He didn't look at me as he stood, his movements stiff and mechanical. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I remembered the years of dismissal, the quiet cruelty of his words, and I felt nothing but calm. As he walked out of the room, the silence was deafening. Then the chairman turned to me. We need someone to take over in the interim, he said. Someone who knows the company inside and out. Someone we can trust. I felt my breath catch in my throat. Me? I said softly. He nodded. You, he said. You've shown us that you're willing to do what's right, no matter how hard it is. That's the kind of leadership we need right now. My hands shook as I folded them in my lap, but my voice was steady. I'll do it, I said. For the company. There was a quiet murmur of approval around the table, and I felt something settle in my chest, something fierce and bright. As I left the room, I walked past Alex in the hallway. He looked up as I approached, his expression unreadable. You think you've won, he said softly. I paused, my head high. I think I'm finally where I'm supposed to be, I said. He didn't respond. He just watched me as I walked away, my footsteps sure and steady. That night, I stayed late in the office, sitting at the desk that had once been his. I looked out at the city lights, the hum of traffic far below, and felt a quiet pride settle in my bones. I thought about everything it had taken to get here, the long nights, the quiet strength I had found in the dark. And I knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The next morning, I stood in front of the staff, my hands clasped in front of me as I spoke. I know this is a lot of change, I said, my voice calm and even. But I want you to know that I see you. I see the work you do, the effort you put in every day. And I want this to be a place where you feel valued. There were nods, small smiles, a sense of relief in the room that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. I saw the way they looked at me, like maybe they believed in what I was saying. After the meeting, I walked through the office, stopping to talk to people, to listen to their worries and their hopes. It felt real, like I had finally stepped into the life I was meant to lead. As the day wore on, I could feel the weight of responsibility settle onto my shoulders, but it didn't scare me. It felt right, like I had earned it. That night, I walked home under the stars, the cool air crisp and clean. I thought about Alex, about the way he had tried to break me down. And I thought about how in the end, it had only made me stronger. I whispered to myself, you're not nobody. And this time, I believed it with every fiber of my being. This was my takeover, and I was ready to lead. The first days in my new role were a whirlwind of decisions and quiet tests of resolve. There were files stacked high on my desk, phone calls waiting to be answered, and meetings to lead that once would have left me shaking with nerves. But as I settled into the chair that had once been Alex's, I felt a quiet certainty grow inside me. I wasn't pretending to be the boss anymore. I was the boss. And it was time to prove it. Each morning, I arrived before anyone else, the office still dark and quiet around me. I would stand at the window, watching the sun rise over the city skyline, and let that steady glow fill me with calm. The day ahead would bring challenges, But I felt ready for them, ready to lead in a way Alex never could. The first challenge came sooner than I expected. A supplier who had always dealt directly with Alex refused to return my calls. He saw me as an inconvenience, someone he could ignore. But I didn't let that stop me. I called again and again, my voice firm and unyielding. When he finally picked up, I spoke with a confidence I'd never known I had. "This isn't a request," I said calmly. "It's a requirement. We're moving forward with or without you." There was a pause, a beat of silence that felt like the world holding its breath. And then he relented. It was a small victory, but it felt like the first crack in a wall I'd been pushing against for years. I started to see changes in the office too. People who had once looked at me as a quiet shadow now met my gaze with respect. They saw the woman who had stood up to Alex, who had chosen truth over comfort. And I saw them too, their loyalty, their quiet strength, the way they wanted this place to be better. I listened to them, really listened, and made changes that mattered. Small things at first, flexible hours for a young mother who had always struggled to balance work and family. A fair hearing for the man in accounting who had ideas no one had ever bothered to ask for. It felt good, better than I'd ever imagined, to use my voice to lift others up. In the evenings, I stayed late poring over the numbers and plans that would shape our future. I was tired, my body aching from the long hours, but there was a fire inside me that kept me going. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building, and with every choice I made, I felt that fire burn brighter. One night, Mark came by the office to bring me dinner. He found me surrounded by stacks of papers, my hair pulled back, and my eyes bright with purpose. "You look different," he said softly, "like someone who knows exactly what she wants." I smiled, a small private smile that felt like it reached all the way to my heart. "I do," I said. "For the first time, I really do." He kissed my forehead and left me to my work, and I felt his quiet faith in me, like a promise I had to keep. The days turned into weeks, and each one brought new challenges. There were moments when I stumbled, when I doubted if I was strong enough to carry the weight of it all. But each time I remembered the woman I had been, the woman who had been told she was nobody, who had believed it for far too long. I wasn't that woman anymore, and I refused to go back to her. One afternoon, I stood in the break room pouring a cup of coffee when one of the junior analysts approached me. "I just wanted to say, thank you," she said quietly, "for listening, for caring." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the reflection of who I had been, young, unsure, trying to find a place in a world that didn't seem to see her. "You're welcome," I said softly. "And I mean it, you're part of this team. Your voice matters here." She smiled, a small, shy smile, and I knew in that moment that I was changing more than just my own story. I was changing the way this company worked, the way people felt when they walked through these doors. And that felt like the most important thing of all. That night, as I locked up the office and stepped out into the quiet evening, I paused for a moment and looked back at the building that had been both a prison and a proving ground. I thought about everything I had faced here, the humiliation, the doubts, the quiet battles fought in empty conference rooms. And I thought about how through it all, I had become someone I was proud of. Someone who could stand tall and speak with a voice that was finally her own. I walked home slowly, the city lights bright around me, the air crisp with the promise of spring. I felt a lightness in my step that hadn't been there before, a sense of possibility that felt like the soft glow of dawn. I knew there would still be hard days ahead. There would still be moments when fear tried to steal my breath, when the old voices whispered that I wasn't enough. But I also knew that I was stronger than I had ever been. And no matter what came next, I would face it as the woman I had fought so hard to become. As I reached my apartment, I looked up at the sky, the stars bright and clear above me. I whispered to myself, "You're not nobody." And in that quiet moment, I knew the truth of it. I was somebody. I was the boss. And this was just the beginning. Spring had settled fully into the city by the time everything came to a head. The air was soft and full of promise, the scent of new blossoms drifting through the open windows of the office. But inside, the tension was palpable. The audit had confirmed everything I'd uncovered: Alex's manipulation, the funds he'd shifted behind closed doors. There was no denying it now, and there was no turning back. The board called another meeting, this one, with the weight of finality pressing in around it. I stood outside the conference room for a moment, my hands steady at my sides, my breath slow and calm. I thought about everything it had taken to get here, every late night, every quiet act of courage, every time I'd refused to be silenced. I thought about the woman I'd been before Alex's words had lit the fire in me, the woman who had believed she was nobody. And I thought about the woman I was now, someone who had learned to stand in her own power, no matter who tried to steal it away. When I stepped into the room, I felt that power settle over me, like a second skin. Alex was already there, his expression unreadable, his hands folded on the table in front of him. He didn't look up as I took my seat, but I could feel the weight of his presence, like a storm brewing on the horizon. The chairman cleared his throat, his voice calm but firm. "We've completed our investigation," he said, "and there's no doubt about the facts." Alex didn't flinch, but I saw the flicker in his eyes, the brief flash of fear before he masked it with a tight smile. "I've given everything to this company," he said, his voice low. "You're going to let one assistant destroy all of that?" I met his gaze steadily. "I'm not destroying anything," I said softly. "I'm saving it." The room was silent for a moment, the weight of my words settling into the quiet. Then the chairman spoke again. "Alex, you're being removed from your position, effective immediately," he said. "Your actions have left us no choice." Alex's jaw tightened, his hands curling into fists. For a moment, I thought he might argue, might try to salvage the scraps of his pride. But he didn't. He stood, his movements sharp and deliberate, and walked out of the room without a word. I watched him go, my heart calm in my chest. There was no triumph in it, no sense of victory. Just a quiet relief, like a storm finally passing. The chairman turned to me, then his expression thoughtful. "You've shown remarkable strength through all of this," he said. "We'd like you to continue leading if you're willing." My breath caught for a moment, the weight of the offer sinking in. But then I nodded, my voice sure and steady. "I'm ready," I said. "I've been ready for a long time." When the meeting ended, I walked out of the conference room and into the office I had once moved through like a ghost. The faces that turned to look at me were no longer filled with doubt or quiet pity. They were filled with respect, and I knew in that moment that I had done more than just survive. I had become someone worth seeing, someone worth following. That afternoon, I stood in front of the staff, my hands steady at my sides. "I know this has been a time of uncertainty," I said, "but I want you to know that I see you, all of you, and I will do everything I can to make this a place where you feel valued, where your voices matter." There was a quiet murmur of agreement, a soft ripple of relief that felt like a promise. And in that moment, I knew that this wasn't just my victory. It was a victory for everyone who had ever been overlooked, ever been told they were less than what they knew they could be. That evening, I stayed late in the office, the glow of the city outside the windows, a quiet reminder of the world beyond these walls. I thought about Alex's final words, the way he'd tried to make me doubt myself even in the end. But I didn't feel doubt. I felt strong. I felt certain. And I knew that I would never let anyone make me feel small again. As I locked up for the night and stepped out into the cool evening air, I felt a quiet pride settle into my bones. I had walked through the fire and come out the other side stronger. I had found my voice and used it to build something worth standing for. And I knew that whatever came next, I was ready. Because I wasn't nobody. I never had been. I was the boss. And this was just the beginning of everything I was meant to be. If you've ever been told you're not enough, let this story remind you you decide your worth and you have the power to rewrite your own ending. So stand tall, speak up, and take your place at the table because the world needs your voice more than ever.